What if I told you that 4 movies made nearly a century ago would create the blueprint for every monster movie you've ever watched? That Hollywood's golden age of horror wasn't just about scaring audiences, but about crafting cinematic legends that still haunt our screens today? Get ready to dive into the dark origins of Universal's monster universe, where Gothic literature met cutting-edge filmmaking and nightmares became box office gold. Picture this. It's 1931, and audiences are about to witness something they've never seen before. Universal Pictures is about to unleash creatures that will define horror for generations to come. We're talking about the birth of the modern monster movie, starting with 4 groundbreaking films that transformed literature's most terrifying characters into cinematic icons. Let's begin our journey with the film that started it all, Dracula, released in February 1931. Director Todd Browning, who had already established himself as a master of the macabre, took on the challenge of bringing Bram Stoker's legendary vampire to life. But here's where it gets interesting. The screenplay wasn't directly adapted from Stoker's novel. Instead, Garrett Fort crafted his script based on the successful Broadway play by Hamilton Dean and John Balderston, which had been captivating theater audiences. The story follows the ancient vampire Count Dracula, portrayed by the mesmerizing Bela Lugosi, as he travels from his crumbling Transylvanian castle to London. Real estate agent Renfield, played by Dwight Frye in a performance that's both tragic and terrifying, becomes Dracula's first victim and devoted servant after visiting the Count's domain. The film brilliantly establishes the vampire's powers, his ability to transform into a bat, control wolves, and most chillingly, his hypnotic influence over humans. Once in London, Dracula begins his reign of terror, targeting the innocent Mina Seward, daughter of Dr. Seward who runs a sanitarium. Helen Chandler brings vulnerability and strength to Mina, while David Manners plays her fiancé, John Harker. The film's genius lies in its restraint. Browning understood that what you don't see is often more frightening than what you do. Van Helsing, portrayed by Edward Van Sloan, emerges as the knowledgeable professor who recognizes the supernatural threat and leads the fight against the undead Count. The climax unfolds as Van Helsing and Harker race against time to save Mina's soul before she's completely transformed into one of the undead. The film's final confrontation in Dracula's London lair showcases the vampire's vulnerability to sunlight and the power of faith, establishing rules that monster movies still follow today. Just months later, Universal doubled down on their monster gamble with Frankenstein, released in November 1931. James Whale stepped into the director's chair, bringing a unique blend of Gothic atmosphere and dark humor that would become his trademark. The screenplay, adapted by Garrett Fort and Francis Edward Farrago from Peggy Webling's play, which itself was based on Mary Shelley's novel, took significant creative liberties that actually enhanced the story's cinematic impact. Here's where Universal made their masterstroke. They changed the scientist's name from Victor to Henry Frankenstein, played with manic intensity by Colin Clive. This Henry Frankenstein is obsessed with unlocking the secrets of life and death, conducting his experiments in a windmill laboratory during violent thunderstorms. The film's most iconic sequence shows Frankenstein and his hunchbacked assistant Fritz, portrayed by Dwight Frye, gathering body parts from graves and gallows. But the true star of Frankenstein is Boris Karloff as the monster. Without speaking a single word for most of the film, Karloff creates a character that's simultaneously terrifying and sympathetic. The monster's awakening scene remains one of cinema's most powerful moments as we witness a created being experiencing consciousness for the first time.
It's alive! Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
The film explores themes that were revolutionary for 1931, the responsibility of creation, the nature of good and evil, and society's treatment of the different. The plot thickens when the monster escapes and encounters the world beyond the laboratory. His meeting with little Maria by the lake becomes both heartbreaking and horrifying, as the monster's childlike innocence leads to tragedy. This scene perfectly encapsulates the film's central theme. The monster isn't inherently evil, but rather a victim of his creator's abandonment and society's rejection. Elizabeth, played by Mae Clarke, represents the normal world that Frankenstein is abandoning in his pursuit of forbidden knowledge. The film builds to a climactic confrontation where the townspeople, led by Frankenstein's father, Baron Frankenstein, hunt the monster with torches and pitchforks. The windmill burning sequence provides a spectacular finale that seems to destroy the monster, though we know better. Fast forward to 1932, and Universal continued their winning streak with The Mummy, directed by Karl Freund, a cinematographer making his directorial debut. John Balderston crafted the screenplay, creating an original story that drew inspiration from the recent archaeological discoveries in Egypt, particularly the opening of Tutankhamun's tomb. The film opens with one of horror cinema's most effective sequences. Archaeologists discover the tomb of Imhotep, an ancient Egyptian priest who was buried alive for attempting to resurrect his forbidden love. When young archaeologist Ralph Norton reads from the Scroll of Thoth, he accidentally resurrects the mummy, driving himself insane in the process. This opening sequence, lasting only minutes, establishes the entire mythology and sets up the main narrative. Mummy and the mysterious Ardith Bey, a modern Egyptian who is actually the resurrected Imhotep in disguise. 10 years after his resurrection, Imhotep has learned to blend into the modern world while searching for the reincarnation of his lost love, Princess Ankh-es-Enamon. The story becomes a supernatural love triangle when Imhotep believes he's found his reincarnated princess in Helen Grosvenor, played by Zita Johann. Helen experiences strange visions and feels an inexplicable connection to ancient Egypt. Meanwhile, young archaeologist Frank Wemple, portrayed by David Manners, falls in love with Helen, setting up a conflict between ancient obsession and modern love. The film's exploration of reincarnation and eternal love gives it a more romantic and philosophical tone than Universal's other monster films. Professor Muller, played by Edward Van Sloan, serves as the voice of reason and knowledge, similar to his Van Helsing role in Dracula. The climax takes place in Imhotep's hidden lair, where he attempts to kill Helen and resurrect her as his eternal bride, only to be thwarted when she calls upon the goddess Isis for protection. Finally, we come to 1935's Werewolf of London, directed by Stuart Walker and written by Robert Harris. This film often gets overlooked, but it was actually Universal's first werewolf movie, predating The Wolfman by 6 years. The story follows Dr. Wilfred Glendon, played by Henry Hall, a London botanist who travels to Tibet searching for a rare flower called the Marifisa lupina lumina, which blooms only in moonlight. During his expedition, Glendon is attacked by a strange creature, later revealed to be Dr. Yogami, portrayed by Warner Oland, who is himself a werewolf. The attack infects Glendon with lycanthropy, though he doesn't immediately understand his condition. Upon returning to London, Glendon successfully cultivates the Tibetan flower in his laboratory, not knowing that it's the only antidote to the werewolf. The film explores the tragic transformation of a civilized man into a savage beast. Glendon's relationship with his wife Lisa, played by Valerie Hobson, deteriorates as he struggles to control his condition. The movie introduces many elements that would become werewolf movie staples: the full moon trigger, the retention of human intelligence during transformation, and the anguish of remembering one's actions as a beast. Dr. Yogami emerges as both antagonist and fellow sufferer, warning Glendon about the curse while competing for the limited supply of the antidote flower. The film's London setting allows for atmospheric fog-shrouded streets and Gothic architecture that enhance the horror elements. The transformation sequences, while primitive by modern standards, were groundbreaking for their time, showing Glendon's gradual change into a wolf-like creature. The climax occurs when Glendon, fully transformed, stalks through London's streets, ultimately targeting his own wife. The tragic ending sees Glendon killed while in werewolf form, but not before experiencing a moment of human consciousness that allows him to express his love and remorse. These 4 films didn't just entertain audiences, they created a new language of horror cinema. They established visual iconography, character archetypes, and narrative structures that continue to influence filmmakers today. From Lugosi's hypnotic stare to Karloff's sympathetic monsters, from Gothic laboratories to foggy graveyards, these movies provided the DNA for countless horror films that followed. What makes these the nature of love and loss, the fear of the other, and the thin line between civilization and savagery. They proved that horror movies could be both terrifying and deeply moving, establishing Universal Pictures as the undisputed master of monster cinema. These weren't just movies. They were cultural phenomena that continue to influence how we imagine vampires, monsters, mummies, and werewolves nearly a century later. I remember watching all of these movies when I was a kid and being so scared to sleep. But now I see them as monumental classics. An American Werewolf in London, modern-day Dracula and Frankenstein movies, even the newest Mummy movies are all amazing and have their rightful place in film history. But the older films with Bela Lugosi, Boris Karloff, and Henry Hull gave us the first look at these terrifying monsters and their creepy tales of ill-sought fate. Of course, the most terrifying was the werewolf because he can tear you to shreds, but the sheer idea of Frankenstein has always been the creepiest of all to me. The slow walk, chilling mannerisms, and being back from the dead was enough for me to pull the covers over my head. Although these movies weren't as scary as we see today, the acting, deep dramatic movements, and directing was what brought these films to life. As we crawl into Halloween, please tell me in the comments which of these 4 movies you liked the best. Also, tell me about one that is not in our list today that you liked in the older genre or as a kid. One I liked, but was not included, is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next creepy movie. Happy Halloween!